When people are leaving their home countries, one of the biggest things that is an issue to pay attention to is banking. And this is particularly bad for Canadians because, as I'll discuss in a minute, most Canadian banks suck for international. So today I'm going to discuss a little bit about the subject of if you are becoming an expat, moving away, you're becoming a digital nomad, etc., and you're from Canada, what sort of banking preparations are optimal for you and why. So we're going to dive into it right now. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notifications bell. If you would like help with relocating abroad, figuring out where to go, getting second residencies, citizenships, forming companies, opening bank accounts, optimizing tax, doing asset protection, etc., please reach out to us. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below, or send a message through our websites, offshorecitizen.net and offshorecapitalist.com. All right, so let's just say that you're from Canada and you are thinking about going abroad now, either temporarily or permanently, etc. I will put a caveat here, and I'm going to explain a little bit around it. If you're trying to end your Canadian tax residency, you typically want to sever as many ties as possible. Now, a bank account does not qualify as what they call a significant tie in Canada. So banking in itself does not make you Canadian tax resident. You could have a bank account while still not being Canadian tax resident. However, it is a tie, and if you're going to keep bank accounts, you want to be more careful about other things. Depends a little bit on whether you have a tax treaty to protect you, etc. So there's a few things to consider in there. However, the reality is simply that you're going to have some sort of banking, at least in Canada, until you do abroad. And you may be in a situation where it just makes sense practically to still have Canadian banking regardless. So here's the issue in Canada. Almost all Canadian banks do not allow online wire transfers. And what this means is if you relocate and then you try and transfer your money from Canada to abroad, you're going to have issues. You usually have to go into a branch in order to send the money. Now, if you have a business account, you can get cash management and have devices, etc. And so that can be an option. But if you're talking about as an individual, you don't typically have this option. On top of that, you have issues with foreign currencies. So Canadian banks almost exclusively deal with Canadian dollars with a tiny bit of US. Almost all other currencies just simply don't exist, which is really terrible. There's no euros in most cases, no GBP, no et cetera, right? Like literally just terrible multi-currency options in Canada, which is crazy given how multicultural Canada is. So you need to have a solution that allows you to transfer money internationally once you're outside of the country. Ideally is going to minimize your foreign transaction fees and is going to possibly support multiple currencies in order to optimize for those transactions. So there's a few different things you can look at here. And one of them, of course, I talk quite a bit about is, getting a Wise account. You can get a Wise card. I would recommend doing that before you leave Canada. They just started allowing the card for people in Canada. So that's pretty cool. I've talked about it. I've done a review on the card. I've done a review on the account. You can go and check that out. So one of the things I would definitely encourage you to do before leaving is open a Wise account and get a card. And this allows you to, it's not great for huge transfers, but for smaller transfers, as well as for having a card that you can optimize on foreign exchange, etc., it's really good. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, you will probably want a card that gives you, ideally eliminates the FX cost. And there are basically two cards worth looking at in Canada for this. They are the Scotia Passport Visa Infinite card, and HSBC Premier also has one. Both of these cards have no FX fees, and actually you can get points on top of it, which is, you kind of gain some double benefit as compared with most other cards. So if you're going to be traveling internationally, etc., I would recommend those. This brings us a little bit to the subject of currency accounts. Again, maybe you're going to Europe and you're going to want to have euros. Maybe you're going to Asia and you're going to want to have one of the Asian currencies, etc. Basically, your two best options for having foreign currencies in Canada are NBC, National Bank of Canada, which is not actually the National Bank of Canada, but that's what it's called, and HSBC Premier. Okay. Now, HSBC Premier is useful. Let's say, for example, you're moving from Canada to UAE. You can have an HSBC Premier account, You can utilize that to have them open you an account in UAE, and then you can facilitate transfers between those accounts quite easily. Plus, as I mentioned, you can go and have the card. Now, you could do it in reverse. You could go to UAE and then you could get an HSBC Premier account in UAE, but the problem again is how are you wiring the money out of Canada? And the second thing that goes along with it as being a problem is your card options are not as good in UAE as they are in Canada. Most of the other places, there's a couple exceptions, but most are not going to be as good as Canada for your card and exchange options. So bear that in mind. You may want to sign up for it before you leave, okay? The other thing that you may want to consider is there are some foreign exchange services. Firma, for example, is a long-standing company. Actually, a friend of mine founded it quite a few years ago, and they've grown into a pretty big foreign exchange company that serves pretty well. So if you want to do larger transactions, larger conversions, that's something. The other thing you should be aware of is you can negotiate lower rates on volume. So often what you'll find is the rate from the bank is pretty bad. But what I often would do is be able to contact the bank and you can get what's called an FX contract rate, which will be for a lower amount. And basically the higher your volume that you're using, the more you can negotiate. There's other FX providers such as Knightsbridge, for example, with Olympus Trust. There's a ton of them that are available. And these are going to be better ways to convert your money and send it where it's going than to operate locally simply through, sending through RBC or something. RBC is probably like the worst bank among these. Anyway, so I hope that helps, gives you some context. The other thing you may want to look at doing is if you're going to be going to the US or engaging with the US at all, which is not a bad idea, honestly, to get set up with regardless. Both RBC and TD have US presence. So RBC, RBC Canada Trust, RBC Royal Bank, is separate from Royal Bank down in the US, and you can do a credit transfer from Canada to the US. So here's the simple thing that I would typically do. One, it can pay to get an ITIN, individual tax identification number in the US. There's no tax obligation that goes along with it, but it can help for building a credit file. And if you're going to be leaving Canada, you may want a credit file somewhere. The US is an alternative. What they'll do is they'll take your Canadian credit and they'll use it to get you a card in the US. Now you can actually get a card that's reasonable through that channel. And the other place you can do that through is TD. TD, because they have on both sides of the border, you can get something called a TD Borderless Account. Not necessarily anything spectacular as a product, but you can get them to give you a card, actually like a real US card, not just a US dollar card, and port your credit. And so what that does for you is it basically allows you to open and establish a credit history in the US, which is hard to do otherwise. And that process is going to start to build the credit, so then you have credit somewhere else and you can build on it. You can buy property if you wanted to. You can get other credit cards, other points cards, etc. I hope that helps, gives you some ideas. Reach out to me if you would have any questions or put them in the comments below. Give the video a thumbs up if you like it, share it with your friends, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you on the next video.